So this summer has been pretty eventful for me in the film category, and I've been trying my best to keep up with posting about them. But I heard about this particular one because of the buzz around actress Scarlett Johansson's interview with the Sunday Times magazine, where she mentions that she is no longer offered roles solely because she is considered desirable. But I mean, that's usually what happens when you get older in Hollywood, especially as a woman. But I couldn't help but wonder, looking at the fact that she's now in her 40s, if she's now done with the male gaze or happy to not be desirable or receiving roles where she's just booked on desirability. But I'm just wondering if she felt the need to say something about it specifically because she wanted us to really take notice that she's happy about it, because she's secretly not happy that she's not the bombshell anymore. Maybe I'm reading too deep into it, but I'm just saying. Could be a possibility. But anyway, watching her in Jurassic World Rebirth has been making me question what was really fulfilling about the role. Because that's what we're going to be talking about today. Sorry it took me so long to get to that point. But yeah, there's another Jurassic Park movie that nobody asked for, and with characters that were a little annoying, not going to say any names, but it's starring a few faces that you'll probably recognize. So first we have Scarlett Johansson, like I mentioned already, she plays Zara Bennett, Jonathan Bailey as Dr. Henry Loomis, Rupert Friend as Martin Krebs, Mahershala Ali as Duncan Kincaid, and Manuel Garcia-Rulfo, who I know as the Lincoln lawyer. He plays Ruben Delgado. But let's get right into it. So we start off with our throwback clip to 17 years in the past at the lab for our scary dinosaur buddies, and we notice that one of the scientists there, who's about to check in on their T-Rex mutant, drops a candy wrapper, and soon it becomes a problem because it ends up causing a malfunction at one of their gates and it's not closing properly. Soon the system reboots itself entirely and there's a containment failure now, and because of that it means they're going into total lockdown. Everyone's running out, but ironically John gets stuck in the container, and he's the one that caused the problem in the first place, and he gets eaten by the T-Rex. Now in the present, we're in New York City, where humanity is now trying to cohabitate with the released dinosaurs. I'm guessing that this is after that little girl decided to free them because she felt a special connection with them back in that Fallen Kingdom movie in 2018. Just maybe. I'm not entirely sure about the timeline here and if they're actually supposed to be connected. But here we got Martin trying to persuade Zara to be a part of a mission that he's trying to carry out, where the plan is to head to one of the islands that has become known as the new home for some of these dinosaurs, because they want to collect DNA samples from 3 species in particular to make a concoction that would cure diseases and illnesses and extend the human lifespan by decades. But Zara seems more interested in the money. She's supposed to be a part of the muscle of the operation, and they meet up with Dr. Loomis, or Henry, to get him on board with coming on as well to help them identify the species that they need to collect from, but he thought initially that he was just advising. But he can care less, honestly, about the money. Martin gets him hooked with just the idea of seeing these dinosaurs in their real habitat where it's just them. So they fly down to Suriname to meet with the boat captain that will take them to one of the islands. But not only is this dangerous, it's also illegal. It's sounding pretty familiar already, but let's continue. They meet Duncan Kincaid, a friend of Zara's from the military, I think, who they just refer to as Kincaid. Suddenly he has a change of heart when it comes to going down to the island in his boat, with Bobby as their team security to make sure that they don't end up being eaten, which again turns out to be pretty ironic as well. There's a lot of irony in this movie. They set sail, but Martin gives them a quick rundown on the island, which is the same one we saw in the beginning 17 years ago, which was supposed to be a park, but it was abandoned because of, you know, issues. But the overall plan is to get in and get out and go home. But, you know, it never really works out that way. Zora opens up to Kincaid about losing another friend to a car bomb while working on a job in Yemen. And they both reflect on their lives, with her missing her mom's funeral and him leaving his wife after they lost their son a few years back. In another part of the Atlantic Ocean, there's Ruben, who thought it was a great idea to go sailing over dinosaur-infested waters with his 2 daughters, Isabella and Teresa, along with Teresa's boyfriend, Xavier, who Ruben thinks is useless and lazy. But clearly Teresa sees something in him that no one else does, but this was supposed to be their last trip together before she went off to college. They spot 2 fins sticking out of the water, and something hits them and turns the boat over. And now Xavier is stuck in the boat, but thankfully they all make it out okay and now are awaiting rescue after making a distress call on the radio. Henry seems to be getting closer to Zora, learning that she's basically a mercenary and his job is a whole lot safer up in a museum. Kincaid tells the rest of the team that he heard a distress call come in from 28 miles in the other direction. That ends up being Ruben and the fam. Now Bobby thinks that they should just leave them since they're already so close to the island and this mission is costing them millions of dollars. But Kincaid, since it's his boat, decides to just head back to rescue Ruben and the gang first. Kincaid comes after Ruben a little bit for having the kids out in the ocean like that and knowing good and well these creatures are out and about. But what's funny to me is when they come aboard the ship, they just think they could pretty much tell them where to go, hoping that they would just drop them off at a port first. But before they could really even debrief them on what they're doing, the Mosasaurus, the same creature that bumped into their boat, arrives. There's a lot of back and forth, and Zora even makes eye contact with it while trying to get the collection needle in it, and you know what that means. They're coming back for you later. But she finally gets a sample, and Henry wants to be a hero by not giving them to the company Parkergenics after they collect the other 2 samples, as if Martin would just allow that. And then our Mosasaurus comes back with a few friends, and it's bye-bye to their security, aka Bobby. Now everyone else on the boat is fighting for their lives, and Ruben injures himself trying to rescue Isabel. Kincaid's plan is to just run the ship into the rocks to outrun these things, and Ruben tells Teresa to make a distress call. So Martin stops her since no one is supposed to know that they're there, and she ends up hanging on the side of the boat, and Martin just stares at her instead of helping. Xavier actually does something useful for once, which is jump in the water after Teresa, then Ruben and Isabel go in right after them. Henry, Martin, and Zora and one of Kincaid's crew members, Nina, jump off the boat right before he runs the boat aground. They get to shore, but Henry's trying to warn them to keep moving because some of these creatures can swim and come up on land. Kincaid and his other crew member Leclerc are fine, but Nina gets snapped up. Ruben and his crew get separated from everyone else, and they're heading to the old lab. Martin is telling their group that the scientists at the old lab were creating mutant dinosaurs and abandoned them on the island. Sounds just like... You know what? Let's just keep going. Zora says that there should be a rescue chopper coming in the next day for them, so they all have to try not to die before then. But then Zora presses Martin about the situation with Teresa falling off the boat, but he insists that he didn't see her in time to help her. But Zora could smell a liar. She just didn't really have much evidence to go off of. Martin finds a small plane that crashed on the island and takes the gun from the dead pilot's hand, because you never know when you might need it. Ruben and Xavier have a little heart-to-heart moment, which Xavier ruins by being himself, of course, but now Isabella has a little dino friend. I honestly think one of the funniest moments in this movie was when Xavier walked off by himself to, relieve himself. But a fight breaks out between 2 dinosaurs behind him. And then after one kills the other, Xavier just goes right back to taking a piss. Then Zora and Henry get to the Titanosaurus, probably one of their easiest samples to get. And then Ruben, Isabella, Xavier, and Teresa end up tumbling down near the river. And Isabella notices her little dinosaur friend, Dolores, was terrified and she left. But they all quickly find out why once Teresa goes to get the boat which she saw across the river. Thankfully, he's sleeping, but she sees an emergency raft and tries to drag it. She has the bright idea to just inflate it, and they're all floating down the river with a T-Rex behind them. And this dude basically starts swimming in front of them and cuts them off. But now Isabella is stuck under the boat, and in my opinion, this is probably one of the most intense scenes of the film. We're all thinking Ruben has to helplessly watch his daughter get ripped to pieces, but she ends up just barely escaping. Zora and Henry's group end up getting to the Matadon's nest and extracts a sample from one of the eggs, and Zora is trying to figure out what exactly his plans are if they don't give the samples to Parkergenics. He goes on to say that he wants to open source it and no one will own the patent, but at least he's honest by telling her that they'll be broke if they chose that option. But the mother returns and now Kincaid has to pull up Leclerc, but it's unfortunately too late. Now Henry is playing with his life trying to reach the sample, and he's pretty lucky that there was some water at the bottom of his fall and the sample ended up dropping right next to him. Ruben and the crew reach the lab, and so does the other group. They find footprints and Zora just starts yelling for Ruben and Teresa when there's giant animals running around. Yeah, seems feasible. But thankfully they find each other without attracting too much attention, and now everyone finds out the truth about Martin and Teresa. He still has the gun, mind you, saving it for a moment like this, and he handcuffs the case with the samples to his wrists. But then the generator kicks in and all the lights and music turn on, definitely attracting some unwanted attention, separating the two groups once again. Isabella finds Dolores again, and now they have to come up with a way to distract the unwanted guests to escape. The other group gets into the lab and discover a tunnel system that leads to a boat, but they also hear a helicopter flying above. Martin, being the true coward that he is, just drives away without Zora, and that's when she sees one of those creatures going down into the tunnel that Ruben and the kids just went in. Henry shoots up a flare, catching the pilot's attention, but then something big and pretty ugly, I might add, ends up getting them first. Safe to say, no more rescue. They all have to save themselves. They all meet up in the underground tunnel, unknowingly with that creature in there with them. Martin is busy trying to save himself and the samples, and Zora takes out the creature, but now they have to figure out how to open the gate, and more things are now after them. Isabella decides to just take things into her own hands by squeezing through the bars and opening the gate, but that big beast is in the way. As Martin's luck would have it, he drives right into it just in time for dinner. And down the hatch he goes, but at least Zora manages to grab the samples. That alien-inspired beast comes back, and Kincaid decides to sacrifice himself so that the others could get away. But of course, Zora is like, oh hell nah. But he drives it away anyway, and she sees the flare go out. They just barely make it out of there, and I'm sure Alien Dude was livid, thinking he was about to have a whole buffet. But they see another flare, and it turns out Kincaid is actually still alive somehow. Everyone's looking at each other all dramatically, and Henry tells Zora that she should be the one to decide on who to give the samples to, and we cue the Jurassic Park theme song as they drive off into the distance. Leaving things open-ended, of course, because you know there's probably going to be another movie after this where they reuse the same plot from one of the older films like they did with this one. Anywho, that was a pretty lengthy one. I had watched this with my family in theaters with a bunch of kids making noise in the background, so I ended up being doubly annoyed with the first annoyance being what I just said, that they just recycled the plot. They of course made a few changes here and there, but we've seen this before, technically, if you've watched all the Jurassic movies. But regardless, overall, I thought the movie was okay. Not great, but also not War of the Worlds 2025 horrible, but just unnecessary. But that's honestly most of the films these days, really. I did find Scarlett's character a little annoying, even though I love her. I couldn't quite figure out what it was, but I do think that in terms of what I said earlier about me not really seeing that much fulfillment in this role, like I was just trying to understand, like, you know, was this a fulfilling role for her? I was just trying to figure that one out, because if it was, I was trying to figure out genuinely from watching her in the film. But, you know, I actually liked watching Ruben and the kids a lot more, mainly because they really were just kind of thrown in there with no way to protect themselves, whereas Zora and everyone else in that other group, they actually had weapons and they were still just getting picked off left and right, even with the guns. So with all that being said, I think the franchise is really trying its hardest to hold on to something that's not really there anymore, because how many times are you going to make a human versus dinosaur movie? Ultimately, how can they invigorate these films? Because I know more are definitely coming. I just feel it. But how many times are y'all gonna have these scientists out there making these hybrid animals and have something go wrong for them to escape? Just trying to figure out how many times that's gonna happen. Like, how have we not learned our lesson? But that's gonna be it for me. You guys can let me know your thoughts on this film down in the comments. What you enjoyed about it. If you enjoyed it at all, I don't know. Let me know. I'll catch you on the next one.